Hey everyone, it's Mike, and this is part 2 of my new training method series where I try to share some of the lessons I learned while trying to become a more competitive Universus player. When I started making this video, I wanted to talk about decision making on your turn, from evaluating your opening hands to making the choice between pushing through attacks or pivoting into a build turn. I found that when I was putting together my slideshow for that, I couldn't really talk about that process without zooming way out and looking at a different topic. So in this episode, instead, I'm going to be focusing on all the resources in the game. So at a surface level, the game has 4 resources. There are cards in your hand, your health, capital, which is what I'm calling your ability to pass checks with your foundations, your character, and then momentum. Now there's a lot of interaction between these 4 resources. They're all kind of interrelated, and you'll find that most game actions that you take involve turning one of these resources into a different resource, either gained for yourself or denied from your opponent. It's important to think about your cards and your capital as renewable. They refill each turn cycle. Your cards go up to your max hand size, and your capital can grow as you play out foundations, but what you have ready to play cards, pass checks, etc. refreshes each turn. These 2 resources share a lot of similarities. They both determine if you can make blocks. They're also both offensive. You're using them to hit your opponent on your turn as well as defend on their turn. Your health, on the other hand, determines if you have to block an attack, right? It's kind of the do or die point of your resources. Once you run out of that, that's the game. Now, I kind of shoved momentum off to the side there because on an empty board, there isn't actually any way to use it. So what it actually does is dependent on the deck you're playing, the cards you have in play, your character, etc., etc. It gets its power from being both a little more powerful in rate than normal game actions, and being versatile, right? You can have momentum effects that are very offensive or very defensive or very utility, all in different ways. So from there, we have some other resources that are kind of harder to quantify. First is your stage presence. This is made up of the abilities of cards on your stage. Most notably non-renewable effects. So these are foundations or assets with flip, remove, destroy costs, basically things that are really only designed to be used once when you play the card. When you use an effect like Fast Friendship that flips to reduce the speed of an attack, you are reducing your stage presence, but if it allows you to make a block that you would not have otherwise been able to, or just lets you block more efficiently, you're gaining short-term capital and preventing the loss of your health. Enhanced steps can be a resource. Pony Sunatori is a relevant example in Standard right now. She gets to add counters to herself once per enhanced step, which translates into other kinds of resources as she spends them, but she is limited by the number of enhanced steps that she gets to use. So the more attacks played on her turn, but also the more attacks played on her rival's turn, the more of those counters she can accumulate and kind of build that stockpile. And then hand quality. This is another resource that doesn't really have a quantifiable definition, but in basic terms, most decks are trying to present a large number of attacks in one turn to finish out a game. So they want to start that turn with a lot of attacks in their hand. Attacks are typically about 1/3 of your deck, so if you're a 6th hand size character drawing a fresh hand, on average, you'll draw 2 attacks. Now, abilities that let you add more cards to your hand, either straight draw effects or things that say draw then discard, are going to increase not just your hand quantity, but also your hand quality. Additionally, if a game is going past turn 2, you have opportunities to sculpt, which is essentially the goal of saving attacks in your hand between turn cycles. If you start your turn with a hand of 2 attacks and then draw 4 cards, you have good odds to start that turn with 3 or even 4 attacks in your opening hand. From the other side of things, if you can put enough pressure on your rival that they have to spend their entire hand blocking your attack string, then they weren't able to hold on to anything, and they have to hope that they draw an above average new hand to backswing you. Okay, so now that we've kind of looked at the resources of the game, we can go back to the original plan of this video and kind of how you structure your turn with that in mind. So we're going to look at an opening hand and just talk through some questions that you want to ask yourself before you play your first form. The hand I have here is just a sample hand from the Earth Pony deck that I played in Atlanta this year. I'm assuming this is the start of turn 2 or turn 3, and I'm making the decision if I want to spend the turn just building more foundations, if I'm going to try to push in for a win, or if I want to poke with 1 or 2 attacks before pivoting to defense. So what is my goal with attacking? Well, if I'm trying to deal damage, then I need to pressure my rival's defensive resources to a point where something gets overloaded. If I can spend more attacks than they have cards to block with, or if I can force them to spend enough capital and get my attacks fast enough, I can reach this point where anything I play is going to come through for damage. Now, I also have to make sure that once I hit that point where my attacks can't be blocked anymore, they're dealing enough damage to close out the game. If I spend too many of my own resources to overload their defense, but I don't actually have the damage to finish them off, then I'm leaving myself open for them to turn around and kill me on the backswing. So on those other turns where you don't have a pretty clear kill string in your hand, what are you gaining when you play attacks? Well, it's resources. As I said a few slides ago, every game action you take is converting one resource into another. When you play an attack, you're spending a card, you might be spending some capital, but you're forcing your rival to spend health or a card from their hand to block with, or their own capital. And on top of that, you're interacting with more of their resources with a lot of the text on your cards. You might be able to pressure them into spending non-renewable stage presence, defensive foundations, things that mess with your zone, things that flip for minus speed, etc., etc. If you can remove those from your opponent's stage on a poke turn, then on a later turn you will have an easier time going in for that kill. You might just bait them into taking an attack to the face. If they value the cards in their hand or they're non-renewables, they might just take that 4, 5, 6 damage early, and then if you decide to pivot, then it's going to be, again, an easier kill on a later turn. So when you're looking at your opening hand, you want to make sure you understand your potential string in a few different ways. So first, you want to look at your checking requirements. We look at a hand like this, 3 attacks at 4 difficulty. If you just play them in order, you have to check a 4, then a 5, then a 6. Typically, your deck is going to be made up of about 2/3 5 checks, 1/3 3 checks. So on something like this, 3 attacks, you have a good chance to check a 3 on one of them. Now, when you check the 3 in that situation, does affect your turn. If you check it early, then you have to commit less of your capital to get that attack played. If it happens late in the string, that might mean that you're either forced to fail the check and your turn just ends, or you might be overcommitting and then putting yourself in a bad situation. Now, on top of that, looking at those checking requirements and how much capital you have to spend, you want to look at your damage potential. We look at a hand like this, you're probably playing Moth into Battle Aura Release into Falling Skies, and just that alone is somewhere between, let's see, 4, then 5, then maybe 8 on the Falling Skies, so that's minimum 17 damage that you're sending. So if your opponent isn't blocking anything, that's about how much you're going to be getting through, 17 to maybe 20, depending on that Battle Aura Release. You also have to think about some unknowns. So first off, is your opponent going to block these? Can they block these? Do they have the right zones in hand? Do they have any hand traps, action cards, or blocks of special abilities that kind of punish you, breaker blocks, things like that? And then your own redraws. So a lot of decks are built where they don't just have to rely on the attacks they draw on their opening hand, but they're going to be drawing more cards throughout the turn. So again, 1/3 of your deck is attacks. If you're drawing 3 extra cards in a turn, you have a good chance of finding 1 or 2 more attacks. So with a string like this, it's only presenting 17 damage. That's not necessarily enough to go for a kill early, but if we look at this hand, it's drawing at least 3 additional cards, 2 from Moth, 1 from Battle Aura Release. you have a good chance of getting that fourth attack. You might even be able to get a little bit further and deeper into the string and present more overall damage. So with that in mind, here's a couple high-level tips to help you improve your game. First, reevaluate between forms. If you decided to attack as your first form in the turn, go through the attack, it resolves, maybe they blocked, maybe they didn't. See if the board state changed in any ways that you didn't expect. So if you did check a 3 on that first attack and you had to commit something, do you still have the resources to keep attacking, or do you have to pivot? Did you draw any new cards during that? Did your opponent spend anything? Did they have any sort of defensive reaction that is going to affect your next play? All these questions you can ask. Why did they block? Why didn't they block? Did they not have the right zone, etc.? And then it gets to the question of, can you attack again, and should you? So does another attack continue benefiting you? What opportunity are you risking by setting another attack as opposed to pivoting? Later in the string, it becomes a question of, can you afford to pass the turn, and should you end the turn? Sometimes you will be playing a 4 diff on a total of 7, and you check your 3 and you look at your stage, and you could commit the 4 foundations to pass it, but maybe it's not going to kill your rival here. Maybe they have a block in hand that you think they might have been saving, and you don't want them to easily backswing you. You're allowed to just fail this check and end your turn. It doesn't feel great, but sometimes it is the right play. Conversely, sometimes you look at it and you say, well, I'm already this far committed. I know my opponent can turn around and kill me if they're given the chance. Maybe that one card in their hand is a +4 low block and I have a high attack to finish them off. That's when you ask, can you afford to pass the turn? If you're already overcommitted and you think you can at least present lethal, sometimes you have to go for it. Tip number 2, your opponent can benefit from your attacks. So this is a big question for playing your first attack or just building. A common example in Standard right now is Bertolt 2. He has this whole game plan of trying to turbo out to 9 foundations so he can transform and end the game. And he uses enhanced steps to do it with these foundations, Weapon Clash and Always Cool. Both of these, if given an enhanced step, let him go up a foundation, up a resource. If it is your turn 2, and you have the choice of either attacking into him or not, that first attack is going to let him do these enhances. So it'll let him go up in resources, it'll let him do his own enhance where he gets to sculpt his hand a little bit, and sometimes even giving your rival the opportunity to block is sculpting for them. If they kept a hand of 2 or 3 defensive cards, or things they really want to use as blocks, if you just don't attack them, now those cards are stuck in their hand for the next turn, and they're less likely to draw the offensive cards that they really want to find for the backswing. With the Bertolt example with Weapon Clash and Always Cool, if Bert gets to use these cards on your turn, they both kind of come at a cost. The Weapon Clash Foundation comes in committed, the Always Cool goes into the card pool, so it messes with his progressive. If he is forced to use them on his turn to ramp, he kind of has to work around those costs. Whereas if you just give them the opportunity, they're practically free. Number 3, sometimes you get to a point in the game where it's coming down to either you check a 5 or you check a 3. When it looks like I have my opponent dead to rights and all I have to do is check the 5 off the top of my deck instead of the 3, I'm usually going to just go for it. At that point in the game, if I'm really saying that it's a 60% chance for me to win, well, I started the match thinking it was 50-50. I'll take the 60-40 coin flip. Conversely, if it looks like I'm going to be putting my opponent into a situation where I need them to check bad, and if they check a 5 on their block, then I'm dead. They have the same odds to check well. So if I'm forcing that situation, it's about 40% against me. So you don't always want to go for that if that's the line that you see before you. You can do the math if you want to and if you have time to, Sometimes I'll give myself a rule of about, if I have 10 cards left in my deck, I will go through all the other info I have, my discard pile, my remove, my stage, my hand, etc. Just count like all the attacks I have, see where all my 3 checks are. I try to go in knowing how many attacks or bad checks are in my deck, so now I can say, okay, there's 10 cards left in my deck. If 7 of these are 3s, then okay, my odds are pretty bad to check the 5 here, so I'm not necessarily going to go for it. Don't spend too much time doing that kind of math. It's not something you want to do all the time because the clock is a real issue in this game. But yeah, know your ratios, know how many bad checks you have, and do the math when it makes sense, when it will actually affect your decision. And finally, get the reps to beat the clock. So a lot of the decision making in this game happens between forms. You deciding what card you want to play next, if you want to play a card next. And the clock in this game, as I said, is a problem. This game, if it isn't over in 10 minutes, games can go really, really long, and rounds will end in draws a lot of the time, and that is typically not something you want as a competitive player. So get practice with your deck, learn all the enhanced patterns that you go through, have good awareness of what is in your rival's stage, get a sense of how you want to string your attacks together, what order you typically do them in, and just get this practice with the deck to make sure it feels good so that you can spend a little less time in the enhanced steps and kind of between all that. And when you have to make decisions on what you're playing next, you have a little more time to do that analysis. Practice also helps with little things. So just the physical movements, moving your cards around, is something that you can learn to do faster, and you will learn to do faster as you play the game. Stage awareness, you don't necessarily have to know every single card in the game, but know the popular ones so that you can look at a glance and say, hey, I know that foundation, that's a nice try, I know what it represents. You don't have to ask your rival or look at their cards for every single thing. And then one of my favorite things to do, the verbal F6. If in a game I know that I have no enhances, no tricks, it's just going to come down to if my opponent has it or not, I will straight up let them know, hey, I'm not doing anything, I'm F6'd, if you got me, you got me. And that gives them the opportunity to play a little bit faster, get through it, and then get to the next game with that much more time. If you are absolutely sure they have it, if they play that last attack and technically you have to go through the enhanced steps but you're dead, just scoop it up. Don't take the time. You need that time to play the next game. All right, thank you for listening to my rambling on resources and gameplay and some of the stuff that I try to think about when I'm playing. If you have any questions you want to ask me about how all this stuff applies, how it interacts, or just general thoughts on the video, reach out in the Discord, reach out in the YouTube comments. In the Discord, I look like that. And that's all I got for today. Peace out.